You're being too sensitive about this, Sydney. My mother's voice cut through the phone like a blade. I was asking about grandmother's estate again, the same question I'd asked a dozen times. The same question that always got dismissed. We'll handle everything. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about legal matters. I gripped the phone tighter. I was 34 years old with a degree in accounting, but to them, I was still the overly emotional child who cried at family gatherings. I just want to understand the distribution, I said carefully. My brother laughed in the background. There she goes again. Always making drama where there isn't any. The call ended with the usual dismissal. But this time, something felt different. This time, I had documentation. Every conversation. Every promise they'd made to grandmother. Every time they'd called me too sensitive for asking legitimate questions. I hung up and opened my laptop. The folder labeled estate documents contained 3 years of careful notes. Phone recordings. Emails. Text messages. I wasn't being sensitive. I was being smart. And soon, they'd understand the difference. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. Thick. Official. The law firm's name embossed in gold lettering. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a formal notice requiring my attendance at the reading of grandmother's will. The date was set for exactly 1 week away. My stomach dropped. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for without fully realizing it. I called my sister immediately. Did you get the notice? I asked. Her voice was casual, almost bored. Yeah. Mom said it's just a formality. Everything's already been decided. Decided by who? By the family. Sydney. Stop being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was observant. For 3 years, I'd watched my parents make decisions about grandmother's care without consulting me. I'd worked double shifts at the hospital to help pay for her medications while my siblings took vacations. I'd sat with her every evening, listening to her stories, her concerns, her wishes. And I'd documented everything. Every conversation where she expressed worry about fairness. Every time she mentioned wanting to protect me. The letter felt heavy in my hands. 1 week until everything changed. I drove to my parents' estate under grey November skies. The house loomed ahead, all brick and perfectly trimmed hedges. The driveway was already full of cars. My siblings had arrived early, probably strategizing. My pulse quickened. I sat in my car for a moment, breathing slowly, gathering courage. The last 3 years played through my mind like a movie. Every dismissal. Every eye roll. Every time someone called me too sensitive for caring about fairness. I pulled out my phone and checked my documentation folder one last time. Everything was organized. Dated. Verified. I wasn't going into this meeting unprepared. I stepped out of the car. The November wind bit through my coat. As I walked toward the house, I could see faces in the windows. Watching. Waiting. Probably already mocking my arrival. My mother opened the door before I could knock. You're late, she said, though I was exactly on time. My father stood in the hallway, silent as always. My brother and sister sat in the living room, whispering to each other. The lawyer's temporary office had been set up in the dining room. Heavy curtains. A long table. Chairs arranged with military precision. Everything designed to intimidate. But I wasn't intimidated anymore. I was ready. The executor, Mr. Caldwell, was a stern man in his 60s. Grey suit. Stern expression. He cleared his throat as everyone took their seats. Before we begin, he said, his voice formal and measured, I must remind everyone that this meeting is confidential and legally binding. My mother smiled that tight smile she always used when maintaining control. My father nodded slightly. My siblings exchanged knowing glances. They thought they knew how this would go. I sat quietly, hands folded, watching everything. Mr. Caldwell began with standard details. Bank accounts. Property descriptions. Insurance policies. My brother yawned. My sister checked her phone. They were bored, confident, already mentally spending their inheritance. But then Mr. Caldwell paused. He cleared his throat again, louder this time. There is an additional document that requires everyone's attention. The room went silent. My mother's smile faltered slightly. Additional document? My sister asked, her voice uncertain. Mr. Caldwell looked directly at me. This document was prepared specifically at your grandmother's request. It contains provisions that supersede previous arrangements. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment everything would change. Take a moment right now to like this story and subscribe to the channel. If you believe justice should be served to those who dismiss and underestimate others, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps share these stories of truth and vindication. My mother's composure cracked slightly. Her fingers tightened around her pen until her knuckles turned white. What kind of provisions? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Mr. Caldwell opened a thick folder. Your mother-in-law spent considerable time in her final years documenting her wishes. She was particularly concerned about fairness and protection. My father shifted uncomfortably. For the first time ever, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Protection from what? My brother asked, trying to sound casual but failing. Mr. Caldwell didn't answer immediately. He pulled out several documents, arranging them precisely on the table. Each movement was deliberate, calculated. Mrs. Eleanor Allen was very specific in her instructions. She expressed concern that certain family members might attempt to manipulate the distribution of assets. The word manipulate hung in the air like smoke. My sister's face flushed red. That's ridiculous. Who would manipulate anything? Mr. Caldwell's expression didn't change. The documents speak for themselves, and they name specific protections for one family member in particular. Every eye in the room turned to me. I kept my face neutral, though my heart was racing. Years of being dismissed. Years of being called too sensitive. It was all about to be validated. Sydney, my mother said, her voice sharp with disbelief. What does Sydney have to do with this? Mr. Caldwell adjusted his glasses. Everything, actually. Your mother-in-law appointed Sydney Allen as primary executor with full authority over estate distribution. The room exploded. That's impossible, my brother shouted. She barely even visited. My sister stood up, chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. Sydney doesn't know anything about estate management. I stayed seated, calm, watching their certainty crumble. Actually, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos, I have a degree in accounting. And I spent 3 years documenting every decision made about grandmother's care.
My mother's face went pale. Documenting? What are you talking about? I pulled out my own folder. Thick. Organized. Tabbed by date and subject. Every conversation. Every promise made and broken. Every time I was told I was too sensitive for asking questions about her wishes. Mr. Caldwell nodded approvingly. Mrs. Eleanor Allen specifically requested Sydney's documentation be considered as evidence of her sound judgment and concern for fairness. The silence that followed was deafening. My father finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor knew about the documentation. She requested it, Mr. Caldwell said simply. In fact, she specifically asked Sydney to keep careful records. My hands trembled slightly as I opened my folder. Inside were printed emails, transcribed phone conversations, detailed notes from every hospital visit. My mother stood up abruptly. This is a setup. You manipulated her. I looked at her directly for the first time. I cared for her. I listened to her. I respected her wishes. That's not manipulation. That's what family should do. My voice was calm, but inside I felt years of frustration finally finding release. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat again. The document also contained specific clauses regarding family conduct. Any attempt to intimidate, coerce, or guilt Sydney regarding these estate matters will result in immediate forfeiture of inheritance. My brother's mouth fell open. Forfeiture? You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. These provisions are legally binding and have been reviewed by 3 separate law firms. My sister sat back down slowly, her confidence draining away. "This isn't fair," she whispered. I smiled slightly. "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" The room waited. "Let's discuss what's fair," I continued. "Fair would have been sharing grandmother's care equally," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Fair would have been consulting me about medical decisions. Fair would have been acknowledging my contributions instead of dismissing them." My mother opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Caldwell raised his hand. "The provisions are clear. Sydney has full authority. Any objections must be filed through proper legal channels." He pulled out another document. "There's more. Mrs. Allen also left detailed instructions regarding property distribution. Certain assets are to be managed exclusively by Sydney." My father's face had gone completely white. "Which assets?" Mr. Caldwell read from the document. "The primary residence. The vacation property. Investment accounts totaling approximately $2.3 million. The number hung in the air. My siblings had gone completely still. $2.3 million, my brother whispered. "Under Sydney's management," Mr. Caldwell confirmed. "With specific conditions attached." My mother found her voice. "What conditions?" I leaned forward slightly. "The condition that none of you can access anything without my written approval." The power shift in the room was almost physical. Years of dismissal. Years of being called too sensitive. All of it was flipping in an instant. My sister tried a different approach. Her voice became soft, pleading. "Sydney, you don't really want to do this to your family, do you?" I looked at her calmly. "Do what?" "Follow grandmother's explicit wishes. Honor her final requests. Enforce boundaries she specifically put in place." "But we're family," she said, tears forming in her eyes. Tears I'd seen before. Manipulative tears designed to make me back down. "Family," I repeated softly. Where was family when I was working 16-hour shifts to help pay for grandmother's medications? Where was family during her hospital stays? My brother stood up. We had jobs. Responsibilities. So did I. But I made time. Every single evening for 3 years. Mr. Caldwell tapped the table. "The provisions also detail past financial contributions. Sydney Allen personally contributed over $47,000 to Mrs. Eleanor Allen's care." My mother's face flushed. "That's not true." I pulled out bank statements. Highlighted. Organized. Indisputable. Every withdrawal. Every payment. Every expense. My father finally spoke, his voice hollow. "You kept track of everything." "Grandmother asked me to. She wanted documentation of who actually cared for her versus who just showed up for appearances." The room had gone completely quiet. Mr. Caldwell continued reading. "Furthermore, Mrs. Allen expressed specific concerns about previous estate discussions held without Sydney's knowledge or consent." My mother shifted in her seat. I saw fear in her eyes now, replacing the usual confidence. "What discussions?" I asked, though I already knew. I'd suspected for months. Mr. Caldwell pulled out another document. "Approximately 18 months ago, there was a meeting at this residence. Several family members discussed dividing assets before Mrs. Allen's passing." "That's not what happened," my father said quickly. I looked at him steadily. "Really?" "Because grandmother told me about that meeting. She was upstairs, supposedly sleeping. But she heard everything." My sister's face went pale. "She couldn't have. The doctor said she was on strong medications." "The medications that I administered," I said softly. "The ones I carefully timed so she'd be alert during evening conversations. She knew exactly what was happening." Mr. Caldwell nodded. "Mrs. Allen documented those conversations as well. She recorded several meetings." My brother stood up quickly. "Recorded? That's illegal." "Actually," Mr. Caldwell said calmly, "in this state, one-party consent is sufficient for recordings. Mrs. Allen was present in her own home." "I want to hear them," I said suddenly. Everyone turned to me. The recordings. I want everyone to hear what was said. Mr. Caldwell hesitated. Sydney, are you certain? Some of the content is quite hurtful. I'm certain. He pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind grandmother kept by her bedside for voice memos. He pressed play. My mother's voice came through clearly. We need to finalize this before Sydney starts asking more questions. She's already too involved. My father's response was quieter but audible. What if she contests the will? She won't. She's too sensitive. Too emotional. No lawyer will take her seriously. The recording continued. My siblings' voices joined in, discussing how to minimize my inheritance, how to dismiss my contributions, how to paint me as unstable if I objected. I watched their faces as they listened. Watched the color drain. Watched the reality sink in. The recording ended. Silence filled the room like water filling a sinking ship. There are 6 more recordings, Mr. Caldwell said quietly, all documenting similar conversations over the course of 14 months. My mother couldn't speak. For the first time in my life, she had no response. I stood up slowly. My legs were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Grandmother knew everything. Every conversation. Every plan. Every attempt to exclude me. My voice was calm. Not angry. Just factual. And she made sure I would be protected. Mr. Caldwell handed me another document. Mrs. Allen also left personal letters for each family member. Sydney, yours is the longest. He gave me a sealed envelope. My name was written in grandmother's careful handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. The letter began, My dearest Sydney, if you're reading this, then my precautions were necessary. I'm so sorry you had to endure their dismissal for so long. Tears blurred my vision, but I continued reading. You were the only one who truly cared. The only one who listened. The only one who asked about my wishes instead of my assets. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing her gratitude, her love, her specific reasons for every provision. At the end, she wrote, Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You were never too sensitive. You were paying attention. There's a difference. I looked up at my family. They were watching me, uncertain now, no longer in control. My mother tried one final time. Sydney, please. We can work this out as a family. I folded grandmother's letter carefully. We are working it out. According to her wishes. Through proper legal channels. But surely you don't need to be so rigid. I interrupted, my voice sharp for the first time. You mean fair, legal, respectful. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. There are additional provisions. Any family member who contests these arrangements without legal merit will be removed from the estate entirely. My brother slumped back in his chair. So we have no choice. You have choices, I said. You can respect grandmother's wishes. You can acknowledge that dismissing me for 3 years was wrong. You can start treating me like an actual family member. I paused. Or you can contest it and lose everything. My sister wiped her eyes. We didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, you did. You meant every dismissal, every eye roll, every time you called me too sensitive. My voice was steady. You just didn't expect consequences. The silence stretched. Mr. Caldwell began packing his documents. I'll need to schedule follow-up meetings to finalize distribution details. Sydney, you'll need to review and approve all requests. As the meeting concluded, my parents stood slowly. My father looked older suddenly, as if the reality had physically aged him. Sydney, he said quietly, can we talk privately? I considered refusing. But curiosity won. 5 minutes. We stepped into the hallway. My mother and siblings stayed in the dining room, whispering urgently. I didn't realize, my father began, then stopped. Didn't realize what? That I was capable of documentation, of planning, of standing up for myself. He looked at the floor. We underestimated you. Yes, you did. I kept my voice neutral. For 34 years, you underestimated me. What do you want from us? He asked. It was the first honest question he'd ever asked me. I thought carefully before answering. I want acknowledgement. I want respect. I want to stop being dismissed every time I raise a legitimate concern. I paused. And I want grandmother's wishes honored completely. He nodded slowly. The recordings. Were they really necessary? They were necessary because nobody believed me. Nobody took me seriously. Documentation was the only way to prove I wasn't being too sensitive. We stood in silence for a moment. Can we rebuild from this? He asked finally. That depends, I said. On whether you're willing to actually change. The following week, I returned to the law office alone. Mr. Caldwell had scheduled a private meeting to review additional documents. Your grandmother left something else, he said, pulling out a small box. She wanted you to have this only after the will reading. Inside was a leather journal. Grandmother's journal. I opened it carefully. The entries dated back 5 years. Page after page of observations, concerns, and detailed notes about family interactions. She'd documented everything, just as I had. One entry from 2 years ago caught my eye. Sydney called today asking about my wishes for the estate. She's the only one who asks what I want instead of what I have. The others visit once a month and spend the entire time discussing property values. Another entry, dated 6 months before her death, overheard another planning meeting today. They assume I'm senile, that I don't understand. But I understand perfectly. They're counting my assets before I'm gone. All except Sydney, who just sits with me and listens to my stories. Tears streamed down my face. I wasn't alone in my observations. She'd seen everything too. The final entry was dated 1 week before she passed. I've made sure Sydney will be protected. She was never too sensitive. She was the only one paying attention. Mr. Caldwell handed me another document. This is a letter of instruction your grandmother wrote. It outlines exactly how she wants the estate managed. I read through it carefully. Specific properties were designated for specific purposes. The vacation house would be sold, proceeds donated to the hospital where I worked. The primary residence would remain in the family, but under my sole authority. Investment accounts would be managed by me, with distributions made only for legitimate needs. She also left detailed criteria for legitimate needs, Mr. Caldwell said. Education expenses for future grandchildren. Medical emergencies. Nothing frivolous. The letter continued with even more specific instructions. Annual family meetings would be required, but only if everyone treated me with respect. Any dismissal or condescension would result in that family member forfeiting their attendance rights. She thought of everything, I whispered. Mr. Caldwell smiled slightly. She spent 2 years planning this with me. Every conversation we had, she mentioned how you were the only one who truly cared. I closed the document carefully. When do we implement these provisions? They're already in effect. As of the will reading, you have complete authority. My phone buzzed constantly over the next few days. Messages from my siblings. My parents. Even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Each message followed a similar pattern. Shock, disbelief, then attempts at manipulation disguised as concern. Sydney, we need to discuss this rationally, my brother texted. Think about family unity, my sister wrote. Your grandmother wouldn't want us divided, my mother called to say. I responded to none of them. Instead, I scheduled a family meeting through Mr. Caldwell. Official. Formal. On my terms. They arrived at the law office looking uncomfortable. This wasn't their territory anymore. This was neutral ground where their usual tactics wouldn't work. Thank you for coming, I began, standing at the head of the conference table. The role reversal was obvious. I was in charge now. We're here to discuss how estate management will proceed going forward. My mother started to interrupt, but Mr. Caldwell raised his hand. Sydney has the floor. Per the will's provisions, she controls all family meetings regarding the estate. She closed her mouth, frustration evident. First, I continued, All requests for distributions must be submitted in writing, with documentation and valid justification. My brother scoffed. That's ridiculous. We're family, not employees.
Exactly, I said calmly. We're family. Which means we should treat each other with respect. Something that's been missing for years. I pulled out my own prepared documents. I've reviewed grandmother's detailed notes about family dynamics. She documented every dismissal, every condescending comment, every time I was called too sensitive. I slid copies across the table. This is what she observed over 5 years. My sister picked up her copy, eyes scanning the pages. Her face went red as she read. The entries were damning. Specific quotes. Exact dates. Undeniable evidence. She wrote all this? My father asked quietly. She was a retired paralegal. Documentation was her specialty, just like it became mine. I let that sink in. Going forward, here are the rules. 1. All communication regarding the estate goes through Mr. Caldwell. 2. No more family meetings without proper notice and agenda. 3. Any attempt to manipulate, guilt, or dismiss me will be documented and used as grounds for distribution denial. My mother finally spoke. You're being vindictive. No, I corrected. I'm being protective. There's a difference. Mr. Caldwell nodded. These provisions are well within Sydney's authority and entirely reasonable given documented past behavior. Over the following months, requests started coming in. My brother needed money for a business investment. My sister wanted funds for her children's private school. My parents requested money for home renovations. Each request came through Mr. Caldwell, as required. Each request included documentation, as required. And each request revealed something interesting. Nobody had actually needed the inheritance desperately. They just wanted it. My brother's business investment was for a third vacation property. My sister's children were already in excellent public schools. My parents' home renovations were purely cosmetic. I reviewed each request carefully. Then I made my decisions. My brother's request was denied. His business was profitable enough without estate funds. My sister's request was partially approved, but only for educational expenses directly paid to the school, not cash. My parents' request was denied entirely. They had sufficient retirement income. Each denial letter included detailed explanations. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being faithful to grandmother's wishes, legitimate needs only. The responses were predictable. You're punishing us, my brother claimed. You're being controlling, my sister complained. This isn't what mother would have wanted, my parents insisted. But I had grandmother's journal. Her explicit wishes. Her documented concerns. I knew exactly what she wanted. 6 months after the will reading, I received an unexpected visitor. My father arrived at my apartment without calling first. I almost didn't let him in. I'm not here to argue, he said through the door. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. I opened the door cautiously. He looked different. Tired. Humbled. I've been reading Mother's journal, he said quietly. The copy Mr. Caldwell provided. I gestured for him to sit. And she was right. About everything. About how we treated you. About the dismissals. About the planning meetings. He paused. About me being complicit through silence. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. I told myself I was staying neutral. That I wasn't taking sides. But silence is a side, isn't it? Yes, I said simply. Your silence was permission. Permission for Mom and my siblings to dismiss me. Permission for them to plan around me. Permission for them to assume I didn't matter. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Sydney. Truly sorry. The apology hung in the air. I wanted to accept it immediately, to rebuild our relationship. But years of dismissal had taught me caution. Thank you for apologizing, I said carefully. But apologies require changed behavior, not just words. My father met my eyes. What would changed behavior look like? It was another honest question. It would look like supporting me when others dismiss me, speaking up when you hear condescension, acknowledging my contributions instead of staying silent. I paused. It would look like actually seeing me as competent, not just sensitive. He absorbed this. I can do that. Can you? Because it means standing up to Mom, to my siblings, to everyone who's comfortable with the old dynamic. I know. He pulled out his own notebook. I've been documenting too. Instances where I should have spoken up but didn't. Conversations where you were right but I stayed silent. It's a long list. I felt something shift. This wasn't manipulation. This was actual accountability. Why now? I asked. Why this change now? Because Mother's journal forced me to see what I'd been ignoring. How my silence enabled their behavior. How I failed you as a father. His voice cracked. And because I don't want to lose my daughter over inheritance money. We talked for 2 hours. About specific incidents. About patterns of behavior. About concrete steps for change. When he left, something felt different. Not fixed, but possibly beginning to heal. My mother's approach was different. She sent a formal letter through her lawyer, contesting several estate provisions. The letter claimed undue influence, mental incompetence of the deceased, and improper documentation. Mr. Caldwell called me immediately. This will require a response. Are you prepared for legal proceedings? I thought about grandmother's preparation. Her detailed documentation. Her multiple witnesses. I'm prepared. She made sure of that. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 months later. During that time, I organized everything. Grandmother's journals. Medical records proving her competence. Testimony from her doctors. Recordings of the planning meetings. Affidavits from hospital staff who witnessed my care. I even found witnesses to my mother's dismissive comments. My preparation was obsessive, detailed, exhaustive. By the time the hearing date arrived, I had built an unassailable case. The courtroom was formal, intimidating. My mother sat with her lawyer, confident and composed. She still didn't understand. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. Grandmother's journals. The recordings. Medical documentation. Witness testimony. Everything. After 3 hours, he set down the last document. I've seen many estate contests, he said. But rarely have I seen documentation this thorough. My mother's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued. The deceased clearly possessed full mental capacity. The documentation spans multiple years and includes multiple witnesses. The provisions are specific, reasonable, and legally sound. He looked at my mother. Your contest is denied. Furthermore, according to the will's provisions, filing a frivolous contest results in additional penalties. My mother's face went white. Penalties. You are removed from all advisory positions regarding the estate. Any future communications must go through the executor, and you forfeit your right to contest any future distributions. The gavel came down. Final. Absolute. Irreversible. Outside the courtroom, my mother tried to approach me. Sydney, please, all communication goes through Mr. Caldwell now, I said calmly. Per the judge's order. She stared at me, finally understanding. The too sensitive daughter had not only prepared for this moment but had anticipated every move she would make. I walked away feeling something I hadn't felt in years, vindicated. Not through anger or revenge, but through preparation, documentation, and letting the truth speak for itself. Mr. Caldwell met me at his car. Your grandmother would be proud. She knew this would happen, didn't she? She predicted every step. That's why her preparations were so thorough. 1 year after the will reading, the family dynamic had completely transformed. My father had kept his word. He spoke up regularly, supporting me in family discussions and calling out dismissive behavior. My brother had stopped making requests. He'd finally accepted the new reality. My sister reached out occasionally, respectful now, asking about my life rather than the estate. My mother maintained distance. Pride wouldn't let her acknowledge the change. But the legal boundaries kept her in check. I'd taken over complete management of the estate. Properties were maintained. Investments grew. Legitimate needs were met promptly. The vacation house sale raised $300,000, all donated to the hospital's critical care unit where grandmother spent her final weeks. A plaque was installed, Eleanor Allen Memorial Fund, for patients whose families show up. I visited her grave every month, bringing flowers, sitting on the bench she'd purchased years before, talking to her like I used to. You were right, I told her one autumn afternoon. About everything. About their behavior. About the need for protection. About me not being too sensitive. The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined her response. I know, dear. I was paying attention too. Today, I manage the estate with confidence and clarity. Every decision is documented. Every distribution is justified. Every family interaction is respectful or doesn't happen. My siblings' children will benefit from education trusts grandmother established. But only if they're taught the values she held: respect, genuine care, attention to others' needs. My parents have learned, slowly, that dismissing someone for years has consequences. That calling someone too sensitive is often just a way to avoid accountability. That documentation beats manipulation every single time. I still work at the hospital. Still live in my modest apartment. Still drive my practical car. The inheritance hasn't changed my lifestyle. It's changed my peace of mind. I'm no longer fighting to be heard. No longer struggling to be taken seriously. No longer wondering if I'm actually too sensitive or if I'm just surrounded by people who don't want to be accountable. Grandmother's final gift wasn't money. It was validation. Proof that I wasn't imagining the dismissals, the manipulation, the unfairness. Proof that paying attention isn't being too sensitive. It's being wise. And proof that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who's been preparing for exactly this moment all along. The executor's throat clearing that afternoon changed everything. But grandmother's careful preparation, and my decision to document everything, is what made that change possible. Some people call it vindictive. I call it justice. The kind that comes not from anger, but from patience, preparation, and refusing to let others define your worth. My parents said I was too sensitive about the will. They were wrong. I was exactly sensitive enough.